Morning.
Good morning. Welcome back, everybody. Here with Blaine the Herd Man.
I just got stuck with that somehow, didn't I?
For sure, but it's so fitting, right?
I guess so.
Yeah. Anyways, we're here for another conversation. Dive into the past, some old stories, some herbal wisdom, and yeah. Last time we had this conversation, we had started to explore your early journeys and adventures off into the wilderness.
Well, yeah, and I talked about how I had a lot of experience growing up, but for that long trip, I had moved to Calgary. This was my first move as a teenager, going to the big city to make my way in the world.
Yeah.
And I was hoping to get a job somewhere in photography, and I couldn't find any job as an assistant, but I got a job at what is now VizTech, is still around.
Right.
And I was processing slide film and doing custom black and white printing, and
Yeah.
it was a lot of work that came in very handy later when I became a full-time photographer.
Mm-hmm.
And I loved the job and the people, but it didn't pay very well. So I was getting very frustrated with even the concept of working for a living didn't quite add up.
Right.
And Christmas was coming, and I realized I didn't have any money for gifts and things, and I was feeling kind of frustrated. One night some friends were over and they left, and I just got thinking about that, and I could just feel myself going into a bit of a swirl, and I just wanted to run away.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to run away from the world, and I think that's what's led a lot of people to run away to the woods at times.
Yeah.
Some of the people that have tried and died, but I thought, well, I can't run away here because I'm new to the mountains.
Right.
And I don't know how far into the woods I'll get with my van, and I'm going to end up somewhere and get thrown off with an angry rancher or a park warden or something. So
Yeah.
I think I need to go back to my native Saskatchewan. And I happen to have a map, and I just looked for a place where there would be quite likely nothing, and not too far, maybe a 2-day hike away from the nearest road, and came up with this spot. And when I talked to the government folks later, they wondered why I wanted to go there, and I said just to get away from it all for a while, and they said, well, there's nothing up there. And I smiled and said, perfect.
Exactly.
That's exactly what I want, is nothing. And they said, well, it would be a good thing for you to do is we'll give you all the names and numbers. There's a lot of trappers. Some of them are retired now, so it's probably not going to count, but you'll get some information from them. So they gave me a list of all the trappers that had the rights for that area, thinking that they may get annoyed if they see somebody else's snowshoe tracks
Right.
around their trap line, right? So I went interviewing all these good old boys, and one of them I remember was he'd had so much repeat frostbite over the years.
Wow.
You can permanently damage your vascular system.
Right.
And ironically, the condition medically is called chill Blaines. And I thought, okay, there's a message there, buddy, chill Blaines, take
Yeah.
care of your feet, right?
Yeah.
So, and some of them thought I was just an idiot kid that would be back within a week. And I'd get advice like, don't eat yellow snow, eh? But some of them...
Unless it's reindeer snow,
Yeah.
right?
Some of them, probably the most important message I got from them was, take your time. You're going to have lots of it. Mm-hmm. And it's only when you're rushing things, like when do you drop a jar of mustard in the kitchen? When you're really in a hurry.
Right.
If you're relaxed, you don't drop a jar of mustard, but when you're hurrying, yeah. Anyway, he said, you've got to, well, whenever you have a spare minute, cut wood.
Right.
Because in the city, you measure a man's wealth by his bank account, but in the forest, you measure a man's wealth by his wood pile. Mm. And what if you got really sick, or you have to hole up for a whole week? Yeah. It's important to have a good wood pile. So I took that very to heart, and whenever I had a minute to spare, I would be out scrounging wood.
Yeah.
And when I left there, I probably had 2 cords of wood that I left behind, that I thought, well, somebody else will use it eventually, or it'll go up in a forest fire or whatever. But so I was running away,
Yeah.
But when I told people what I was doing, anybody around my age would say, oh yeah, I'm going to do that someday. And I knew they never would.
Right.
And as I talked to older people, a lot of them would almost tear up a little bit, and they'd say, oh gosh, I sure wish I would have done something like that at your age, you know. But they said, as you get older, there's all these M words that happen, like marriages and mortgages and things, and,
right.
and illnesses, and you just can't run away like you're going to do. So go for it. You know, and some of the elders would actually tear up thinking of things that had happened in their own life or whatever. But I got a lot of support. And that became almost my immunity. When I got up there, I realized I wasn't even doing this for me anymore.
Right.
I was doing it for all the people who couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, you know, just would never do a trip like that. So I couldn't starve or get frostbite or get drowned or lost or anything.
Yeah.
Because it was like, I really felt like the whole thing was being filmed. You know, I was the star of my own movie.
Right.
And that became my immunity.
Cool.
I couldn't screw up.
Yeah.
And that brought me a lot of power somehow. So,
as you've described it, you know, especially that age, like it sounds like a rite of passage, really.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. Like, you either get up and go chop wood and haul water, or you freeze to death in the dark. So it's kind of a, oh, work, live, work, live, working for a living. I think I'm getting it now.
Yeah.
You know, where, you know, in town, especially now more than ever, a lot of young people just don't get it.
Yeah.
And people grow up thinking that they automatically deserve a nice vehicle in a 3-bedroom home with a swimming pool.
Yeah.
And that the government should help them get it.
Right.
And as if government is free money.
Yeah.
It's everybody's money, you know. And anyway, there's a lot going on right now that I find a little pitiful, really.
Yeah.
With
and I think a big part of it comes back to not having those initiations, not having those rites of passage, those like really transformative experiences where you're tested, you're challenged. Like kids today are so kind of coddled and sheltered, and I mean that's been going on for a while too.
Yeah. Laying on mom's couch with playing video games,
right,
instead of going out to find a job. Like when I was growing up, getting out of your parents' home and getting a job, we used to, an old friend of mine, Damon Johnson, would always joke that your graduation for grade 12 was often luggage. Just get the heck out of here, you know, go make it yourself a place in the world. So here's some luggage to help you out.
Yeah.
You know, and now it's like, for people that can afford it, it's a brand new Volvo or something is your gift, and so many kids go out and wrap it around a tree within 3 weeks. So yeah, I think a lot of us, you use the word coddled. It's not everybody. I mean, for sure, there's lots of people who are poor and in dire straits, but yeah, our culture has just changed a lot within a few generations, for sure.
Yeah. And how formative do you think it was for you, like on that idea, that note of, you know, working for a living, having to go out and, you know, gather your own food or hunt your own food?
Everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it clicks in right away. You're going to actually be hungry tonight, or you have to go out and hunt.
Yeah.
So, there were things that I slowly realized, like as we have natural cycles, like people call them rabbits, but they're actually hares,
right,
in the boreal, and they go through 7 to 10 year cycles where their population goes up and down.
Right.
And I was amazed at how many grouse I was getting to eat, and the odd rabbit, where usually it would be the other way around.
Right.
And I thought, oh, well, maybe this is a down year for the rabbits, so nature provides, and there's more birds than usual, so that hawks and owls and foxes don't starve. Mm-hmm. You know, all these things,
you
know, linked together. And I remember one morning getting my canoe in the water, and an old Cree fella came down and said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Trout fishing." He said, "Oh, no, you're wasting your time. Don't go until you see the yellow powder on the..." So he was talking about spruce pollen.
Yeah.
And because he said, that they're not going to bite until the spawn's over, and that is tied in with the ripeness of the cones on spruce trees, and you get all these little clues, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So I learned quite a few things from people that became my Cree friends during that period in my life too.
Yeah.
You know, we grew up with a lot of indigenous people in our classes, some of them that have been brought into the city and had to stay in long houses, you know, these big dormitory type places, and I learned a lot with, there were times when I had a new pair of moccasins that had been smoke tanned, and they were so stinky that I had to leave them in the hallway. Like the teacher wouldn't let me bring them into the classroom, you know,
No
just
way.
the whole classroom stunk. So that was my first adopting a lot of First Nation culture.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out here, getting introduced to a lot of the local people, Blackfoot and whatnot, and it got to the point where I was very proud years later to be doing, they even realized their young people have missed a step.
Right.
And where Grandma and Grandpa used to teach the youngsters all about the wild plants, young adults have to go work for a living to get groceries.
Right.
And it used to be the grandparents that taught children. But now grandparents seem to be of no use to a lot of people.
Right.
And the children aren't learning from anybody.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up quite proud that I was helping teach First Nation people how to be, I'll just say the word Indian again.
Right.
You know, it confused me at first, but it was something that I took on with pride after a while.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you just get into, I had a place I used to like going up on the edge of Stony Land on the South Coast River. We used to drive up there a lot, and there were times when the first time I was in there, we found this place with a little rapid in a gorge and spent the night there enjoying the sound of the rapids. And my girlfriend, the next morning, she was one of those people who's just quite a seer, and dreams are meaningful. Mm-hmm. And she dreamt that up on the cliffs where we were camped below was lined with warriors keeping an eye on us. Mm. But as I spent time there, things would happen. Like one day I was out with somebody else on a hike, and we were into the reserve area in this beautiful forest, and motion caught my eye, and I looked up, and a hawkwing was just flitting down out of the sky and landed right in front of my feet. Mm. And I picked it up and looked at her and said, "Oh, I guess I've earned my wing."
Right.
And I could logic it out to think, I think this is a young Swainson's hawk, and there's a big red-tail nest nearby, because I'd photographed them over the years, and the Swainsons probably got too close to the red-tail nest. So I said, "Look, you stay right here. I want to spiral out from where we're standing, because the rest of that bird probably isn't far away.
Right.
And I want to just keep calling back to keep on track. I want to spiral out." And never did find the rest of the bird, but I'm pretty convinced that that's what happened there. But that became my for ceremony,
right?
For fanning the sage kind of thing. So, and just different things. I brought this rock today. On another trip when I was out there, I was alone on that trip, and I had already been there for a day and a half, and I woke up on the second morning, and this rock was right in front of my tailgate. It had rained overnight and it was full of water. There's no way I would have not seen this yesterday, kind of thing.
Yeah.
And like somebody brought me this rock, which must have tumbled down the nearby hillside there and cracked up. And I just thought, like, people along the shoreline around the ocean use seashells as their little smudge bowls, and
yeah.
People further south would have used clay to make bowls. And I thought, this is just perfect to use as a mortar and pestle for grinding some seeds and roots and things up, for herbs.
Yeah.
And I haven't used it much. I keep it just as sort of to show other people how when you need something, even without asking, sometimes things are provided for you.
Right.
But I knew that when we camped there, we were always welcome. there was another occasion we got out late on a Friday evening and went out on a bit of a hike, and my girlfriend was underdressed and got a little chilly. It started snowing, and so she said, "You keep going, and I'm going to go back to camp and get a fire on." And when I got back and we were having supper, she said, "I had this vision the whole way back that I had a wolf tracking me." And when I came back the same route, and it was snowing, so these tracks were super fresh, there was a point where a wolf had come down out of the forest and flanked her as she walked along the river for quite a ways, like more than a city block.
Yeah.
And I looked at her and said, "Honey, the wolf was there. It was real. It wasn't just a dream state for you. That wolf was there."
Right.
And things like that. It was a very special place for me.
Cool.
You know, so sometimes you just know it's okay to gather herbs here or whatever. Like my story the other day about picking the wild sage.
Right.
You know, they wanted me to pick them
Yeah.
to give them a purpose.
Yeah.
Otherwise, they just die. And being made into smudge gave them meaning. And you can look at how Artemisia frigida is one of the absolute best herbs we have for getting rid of tapeworms.
Right.
Right? So when you take it orally as a tea, you're cleaning out parasites from your intestines, so evil spirits, right? And so when we use it for smudge,
Yeah.
what are we doing? We're cleansing the room or ourselves of evil spirits.
Right.
And how that ties together on the physical plane and on the spiritual plane, right? And
Yeah.
I think a lot of that happens more with indigenous people all over the world that brief visitors with round eyes and white skin ever pick up on.
Right.
You know, you have to stick around for a while
Yeah.
to learn what's really happening and
Yeah.
get away from your computers and your telephones and what number of pizza you like at that spot.
Yeah.
It takes weeks to just get all of that garbage that clogs our brains until you stop and start to really see things around you.
Well, it comes back down to that slowing down as well, right?
Yeah.
Like our modern world with, like social media is the biggest kind of perpetrator of like,
Where are you going? I'm shopping at midnight. Well, they're still open. Never mind. Could you pick up some yellow ones for me? Yeah, that's where too many of us get stuck.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah. So this idea of, being in nature, going through some sort of like, journey, a rite of passage, not only, you've shared, can one be challenged, right? Like you got to work and there's that direct cause and effect correlation, but also the gifts come too. I did a lot of similar kind of travels and journeys when I was younger, and a big part of it for me was about, just being completely open to the magic. Okay, what's going to happen today? Like I'm a surrender almost.
Yeah.
And sometimes it does put you in that place of really challenge. You got to persevere to like get through whatever you've encountered. And then sometimes it's just pure magic of like, oh my gosh, how did this all unfold? Right? Or gifts showing up, that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah, when you watch some of these shows like Survivor or whatever, where some people do so well and other people fail miserably, and it's kind of like, as much as I like hiking, if you go out with a group of friends hiking, usually you have a destination in mind where you're going to have lunch or whatever. So you're hiking through the woods and everybody's talking too loud and whatever, and you don't see much wildlife,
Right.
because you're just a noisy bunch going through the woods. But when you're alone or with somebody else on the same bent as you tend to go through the woods really slowly,
Yeah.
because you're looking for anything that's out of place. It could be a lump or a bump, or maybe you just notice something out of place over there on a tree. Could be a grouse, could be some chaga.
Right.
It could just be a burrow. So it means nothing.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's just something you haven't learned about yet. Maybe burrows are significant. I don't know.
Yeah.
To me, it's just something you might make a bowl out of later or whatever. But moving slower in the woods is where you see and touch more.
Actually, another thing that we've done in our society, we talk about, the kind of the coddling of our young and just our species always just creating, you know, comfort. And when we remove dangers out of our environment, this perspective came from Stephen Hared Buhner, you know, where if you're in the woods, you got to be really careful, right? There could be bears, there could be cougars, could be this, could be that. And when you remove that, you become careless.
Yeah. I remember an occasion where I was out, I guess this is that K Country? Ribbon Creek.
Ribbon Creek, yeah.
Where the hostel is there, and I'd done some workshops at the hostel and knew the lady running it quite well. And she knew I was going out looking for arnica and said, well, keep your eyes open because I just had a black bear go right through the backyard yesterday. And so I was on my knees in some moss, moving very slowly. I'd gotten off, there was a trail, and I was trying to stay parallel to the trail. And so I was sort of going like this with the trail, from the trail, on my knees picking flowers. And a deer had been coming down the other way, kind of in a curve, just grazing. Mm-hmm. And I was looking down at these flowers, and I just felt the major presence of a large animal right in front of me. And I was almost scared to look up. And when I looked up, the deer's face was as close as yours this morning. Way. And I just froze and said, hi, I'm really glad you're not a bear.
Yeah.
You know? And that's, it's fun to, I haven't hunted with a gun for a long, long, long time. If I'm out on a canoe trip where I'm going to be a long ways in the woods, I still carry a bow. I'm pretty good with it. And I might take a bird or a duck or something after a few days on fish. And it's just interesting how it's almost like when you need it, old man, whoever we want to call him, whoever you want to dress as God or some other provider, just things come to you, mm-hmm. you know?
Right.
And you can do it guiltlessly. But that awareness comes with time, and like you were saying, you've got to just be still for a while to notice things. Mm-hmm. You know, we were something that for a long, long, long time I believed couldn't have happened. When I was just a very little boy, probably about 4 or so, we have a plant called baneberry.
Right.
So in Old English, wart means good for. Mm-hmm. Something like lungwort, you'll find old recipes for lung functions, bronchitis and things like that. And wart means bad for. So if there's something
or
called bane, yeah. means bad for. So baneberry
right.
is a very, very poisonous berry.
Yeah.
And it grows, when the fruit comes, it's about this high, which is eye level for a 4-year-old.
Yeah.
And there's a big clump of these really, really shiny berries. Mm-hmm. They just look they must be yummy. And I'd wandered away from a family picnic, I don't know, maybe just to have a pee or something. And I saw these berries, and I was just reaching for these berries, and I heard this almost like an old witch say, "Hey there, you little whippersnapper! What do you think you're doing there?" And I thought, well, I'm going to eat your berries. And there's something wrong about the look of my berries, isn't there? And I thought, well, they're so perfect. They look like the fake fruit on Grandma's coffee table.
It's true. I think that as well. Yeah.
And because they're too shiny, they're just too perfect. And she said, "You don't eat my berries." And I mean, I could have died that day, mm-hmm. but the plant warned me.
Right.
And I always felt that was some hallucination I had mm-hmm. until I got caught up 50 years later in this whole plant spirit communication thing. Mm-hmm. So I actually had my first, I just think as children, like I've come to believe that children all see auras.
Right.
That we train them out of it.
Yeah.
Like if you've got your liver heat or you're really angry about something one day and you've got this green aura going and your child is coming up to, "Mommy, you've got green hair today." And you might look down and say, "No, Susie, I have blonde hair. there's no green here. And they kind of go, oh, okay, I was seeing things. But, I really think that kids are so intuitive, it's silly, and we just don't respect it.
Yeah.
We can learn from our children. They know when something's off.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, the veils are thin, and I've seen this in some of my nephews, just their, that a range of 3 to 5, aware of past lives, or even Eska, my son, the other day, Laura was, talking about this idea of bones, and when we die, we leave our bones behind, because we've been out in the forest and, seeing bones and that kind of thing. And he was really contemplating on it. He's like, that would feel weird. Leave your bones behind.
Where does the rest of you go?
Right.
The rest of you is just data.
Yeah.
So it can go wherever it is. Back to source, back to the light.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
that's interesting. I love those old words, right? So the bane, we still have that. The bane of your existence. There's flea bane and wolf bane and dog bane and these different herbs that describe that. And then wort. Another interesting thing. You and I were talking about malt and barley. Just kind of randomly. The idea of a beer in a process. There's a step where it's called the wort.
Yeah.
And
right.
very oftentimes that's when all those herbs were added too, right? Yeah, we commonly know hops being used in beer, but there was a time where it was any number of herbs. I like to say people would go to the ale house for what ails them, because it was basically a place to drink herbal beverages.
Yeah. Yeah, and people who don't know better think they make beer out of hops. No, it's used as a flavoring.
Yeah.
Really. But it's got a number of herbal aspects to it that, well, I don't want to start defending beer here, but there's so many things that change their effects with dosage.
Right.
Like coffee at high doses is actually a depressant.
Right.
So if you have a cup or two of good quality, fresh ground, quality organic coffee in the morning, it's a very good stimulant. But if you have 20 cups a day, it's a severe depressant.
Right.
So you get these people that are, well, I need another cup of coffee. How many of you had this morning, Bill? Oh, I don't know, 20?
Yeah.
Well, just give it up for a couple of weeks. Most people get a headache because their arteries shrink in their brain, so they got a headache because they gave up their coffee. But give it up for a couple of weeks and have a cup and realize what a powerful stimulant it is.
Yeah.
But at high doses, it flips around too. Even alcohol, at a low dose, you go to a wine tasting or something like that, an art gallery opening, and if you have a glass of wine or two, you get all chatty and visiting and socializing and whatnot. But if you have 8, you're under a table somewhere, because it goes from being a stimulant to a severe depressant. Right?
Yeah.
So a lot of things flip on, and that's part of what happens with homeopathy.
Right.
I think is when we look at, I think it's still available over the counter as if you've got food poisoning or something, you might drink. I think it's Ipecacuanha. They call it Ipecac is the modern name for something that would be you would take it to throw up intentionally, to get something bad out of your tummy. What's the tree called? Ipecacuanha something. But in homeopathy, you take it for nausea.
Right.
So in a microdose, it's the other way around. Right?
Like cures like.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always about dose. So that's an interesting segue here. We'll talk about homeopathy, this idea of flower essences. It's not something that I'm super familiar with or have worked a lot with. I know you have experience, and I actually found something that came from your house, and you had mentioned this in a previous conversation.
Oh, wow. This is the mother.
That's the mother.
Yeah, I'm glad to see it's in good hands. This is very special. This is a lifetime or 2 lifetime supply. You realize that?
You got to tell me more about it. You had mentioned it. You're like, oh, I really hope the mother's still around. And
oh, this so opens my, oh gosh, I might even cry. This was made midday on a cloudless sky day, right on the summer solstice. And this is made from the Pink Lady slippers who had given me their permission. I meditated with them and said it was okay because they were doing so well where they were growing for me to take some of the grandchildren's flowers. You don't touch the roots, and they're plentiful where I picked this. And yeah, when I brought it back to Calgary, I think I told you I was experimenting. I wouldn't tell people what it was and just give them a few drops on their tongue and ask if they felt anything. And I remember the occasion where a group of women were there, and before long one of them opened her eyes and said, "Love, I get love." And I fished for, I said, "Any more than that?" And another one said, "Unconditional love." And I felt so fortunate to have had that experience. Yeah, I'm going to have to get some of this back from you.
Oh, absolutely.
When I get my head straight.
Yeah, I mean, I present it, you know, you tell me what should be done with that.
Well, if you make, what you do now is you mix some brandy with some nice spring water, about half and half, and just add a dropperful of this. That's why this is, there's enough here to treat Calgary kind of thing.
We'll put it in the water supply.
You know?
Yeah.
And that's how it goes, where it's the opposite of pharmacy. A lot of the remedies that we have from nature go against, most of our modern drugs are dose-based, where to work, if you have, depending on your weight and so forth, they might say women need a little less zinc than men do, but that's just based on weight, because most women are smaller. And so if you got a big, large woman, no, you can take the men's dose and that sort of thing. But it's based on the premise that we were born innately with the ability to heal ourselves.
Right.
But we get off track, and flower essences help us get back on track. It's one of the many ways that we call vibrational healing, where they're just triggers to stimulate yourselves. And some of the very low-dose applications of essential oils work that way too, where a high dose of full-strength, neat essential oil can be tracked scientifically. It's a pharmaceutical dose, but it works in other ways too, where they've given people with infections microdoses, like just a few drops of 5%, tea tree, for example, and it still works. And science, left brain pharmaceutical science, can't figure that out. So we have, as opposed to pharmacy, there's another word, pharmacognosy, which is where we're looking at the plants used more direct from nature than making concentrates and that sort of thing, or synthetics from them, like I was talking about the other day. And I didn't know that this existed. And I was thinking it was a 500 ml bottle. This is a whole liter.
Yeah.
And that's mother. So, well, that's a lifetime supply, man. You should share that with everybody you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
That picking up?
Yeah.
And again, it was made under the ideal conditions. I wasn't raping and pillaging. These were plants that I've meditated with numerous times. They're still there. And it's the sort of stuff that gets destroyed probably permanently when there's a forest that's clear-cut. Or, although forest fires we're dealing with right now are renewing, I think it's pine cones that have to get up to a couple hundred degrees to pop open.
That's right.
For the seeds to come out.
Yeah.
And there's so much, there's many things like morels and blueberries and various things that come back abundantly after a fire.
Yeah, the burn morels.
A good hot fire is what gets rid of pine beetles,
right.
you know, that sort of thing. So when we have, with what we're going through right now, the limited resources of our firefighters, they're doing the best they can to protect properties, save fishing villages or fishing lodges, I meant to say, and things like that, where in many areas there just isn't the manpower, nor should they stop the fire, just let it burn.
Yeah.
You know, but they use techniques where they go in like ahead of a fire. If it looks like the wind's going to be going that way for a few days, they go in with bulldozers and just create a dead zone. Right. Sometimes they even start a series of small fires to create a dead zone, so the big fire just burns into a dead zone and goes out. It just snuffs itself, right?
Right.
So, yeah, you know, we have to accept that forest fire is a part of renewal to the forest. But for some species, like all of those, I always call them little people, for all those little plants that grow in the woods, if it's a heavy fire, and you can get in places like in the boreal where there's cracked rocks and things that fill with peat moss and whatnot, where you might be canoeing or whatever and have a camp on an island for a couple of days, and if you don't set up your fire pit with a proper rock base, your fire from the coals can go down into the ground and come up on the other side of the island 3 weeks later.
Yeah.
You know, so we have to be so careful about fire pits and things like that when we're in that part of the world. Here, less so, because everything's so rock-based. Mm-hmm. You know, you're out camping somewhere in the foothills beside a river, and it's just all rock down there, you know. But, yeah.
How much do you think is to this idea of, you know, that Indigenous people would work with fire intentionally? You know, like I've heard that they would burn areas where Saskatoon grew, and then that would, you know, allow for a better harvest, you know, again.
In following years.
Yeah, renewal, rejuvenation. And, you know, a lot of what we're experiencing is because we've lost that practice of working with fire and helping manage the forest through that on the land. And there's a lot that's kind of beyond its time that should have been burnt earlier.
And this is an area where a lot of mistakes have been made, both here as well as in the U.S. with national parks.
Right.
Where, and this time I'm talking negatively about tree huggers. They just want to save every tree, mm-hmm. and you get an area of old forest that has to burn because it's not being managed.
Yeah.
So, like when you have a property on the edge of a forest, you want to make sure that around your home you don't have a bunch of dry leaves building up under the deck. Big fires, like when you get a crown fire that's going really quickly across the top of the forest, embers from that can go easily a mile. Like big fires create their own weather, really. Mm-hmm. And those embers can go right across a lake and start another fire on the other side. So keeping all of the underbrush and whatnot, like you can't just save every plant.
Yeah. Because
it's a national park. You've got to get rid of some of the undergrowth to make sure that you're protecting the larger trees from that sort of damage. And then one small fire. So many big fires in our area have been traced back to people dumping their ashtrays out of their car on the side of the road, things like that. You know,
flicking a butt.
And
I've even heard going along a road and kicking up rocks and somehow in the metal and the friction of that, and then. Whew.
Oh yeah, that's why I'm fully for around here in a lot of areas when we have fire bans and it's really dry. You can't take bikes or ATVs out on the trails.
Yeah.
There's a lot of places where dry grass is over the trails, and you got just the mufflers and things can be really hot on a bike. And start a little grass fire, and then it just gets bigger and bigger. And
yeah. And what were you saying about a forest in terms of when it gets hot and dry? you know, in some sense, it's just creating the perfect conditions to spark.
Well, all conifers, we can think about, I always kind of giggle when I see somebody saying, our essential oils are all medicinal grade.
Right.
Because I've saved a few people from severe bronchitis with turpentine that I found in their basement.
Right.
It's not that I want to use that quality of things, but you're out on a farm somewhere and there's nobody around and there's a big blizzard and little Becky's got a pneumonia, but there's some turpentine there. We might use some lard rendered from a pig or something to rub her little chest down and then smear some turpentine on it. And it's a perfect expectorant because it's a solvent.
Right.
So when you get really hot areas, so essential oils, a lot of them are simple hydrocarbons. Like there's these little things called terpenes that have 5 sort of isoprene units. And there's 5 carbons, and if 2 of them hold hands, there's 10 carbons. That's called a monoterpene. Right. If 15 of them hold hands, it's called a sesquiterpene. If 20 of them hold hands, it's called a diterpene. As you get up into the diterpenes, we're talking hormones.
Right.
And if we go a little bigger to quadriterpenes, we're talking steroids. So they're like Lego building blocks.
Yeah.
But on their own, they're solvents.
Right.
So like 3 carbons holding hands is actually propane.
Oh.
Like octane levels, that's 8 carbons holding hands.
Right.
So we use a lot of them. We live in hydrocarbon country. So when you're out in a forest that generates terpenes, all those fumes get in the air, and if it's been really hot and dry, something very little can strike. A lot of fires come naturally from lightning strikes. If it's been really hot and dry for a long time, the area is just, people think it's nice because you can smell.
Right, yeah. I'm
You
just
can
thinking
smell
of
them
like
on a walk.
southern BC, you know, like in the Ponderosa forest.
Yeah, but that's actually pure solvents up there.
Right.
That are explosive.
Yeah.
You know? And when they get really dry, it hasn't rained for a month and that sort of thing, or in the Boreal right now, we had a lot of early spring, like Chinooks in places where they don't usually come, and the snow wasn't very heavy, and so everything's just a powder keg up there. So that's why we've got here, and in the Boreal, we've got, like, what have we got now, 80 fires, I think, in Alberta, something like that?
Yeah, yeah.
And a lot of them will be just left to burn.
Yeah.
We do what we can to save towns, and when you look at what happened to Fort Mac a few years back, you know, when things get that out of control. So the government and a lot of private citizens volunteer to help put fires out to save property, but a lot of the big ones, we just have to accept that as a natural renewal.
Yeah.
But it's scary, and you just have to be so careful if you're going to be out camping or whatever. You have to be so careful with what you're doing with your fire. On a lot of canoe trips, for a couple of reasons, we would always have our fires right down at the edge of the river and have our tents, I almost said teepees, our tents. I don't know anybody that's ever had a teepee in a canoe because you got those long poles, right? You drag them across the prairies, not run big rivers. Anyway, you're going to have your fire where you cook and such way down there, especially if you've heard there's problem bears in the area.
Right.
Because the last thing I should be doing is frying bacon and then going back up to my tent for the night with especially something like a buckskin shirt on.
Right.
It just reeks of bacon fat, and their noses are good enough to smell toothpaste, you know. So you do everything to do with cooking down there and have your tents up there,
right,
and then the bears aren't going to bother you, you know. So and then you don't have a concern about the fires either.
Yeah. Yeah, another thing, I mean, it's just the cycle of life. In a younger forest, it might be more of a mix with, you know, deciduous and different plants. And I've heard that the deciduous act as natural fire breaks themselves as well. Not having that high terpene content, I'm interpreting, not being, you know, as much tinder. And from what I've heard and I understand, there's a few groups out there like Stop the Spray Alberta, Stop the Spray BC, where I believe it's logging companies are glyphosate areas to get rid of the deciduous trees to kind of favor the conifers, the hardwood, the timber, and that has also been causing a lot of problems.
Yeah, proper management, we sometimes have to go a long way with. It's not faulting anybody to use the word ignorance. Like you just don't know better.
No, totally.
Right?
Yeah, and I think that comes back to, you know, you mentioned several examples where, you know, Indigenous people who've been on this land, who have, you know, lived a slow life, integrated, you know, in nature, in the ecosystem, and all their observations and experience have led to millennia of wisdom. And when that stops getting passed on, or somebody comes in with new ideas and has no idea, right? Like, how do we manage a forest? You know, are you learning in the university, which might have some great insights, but if we're not honoring, the wisdom of those that have truly inhabited this place, we're going to run into some troubles.
We have different things when you look at some of the tribal cultures where tribes like the Cree, for example, that followed the buffalo herbs for survival, where in the interior of BC, or the coastal tribes especially, there was abundant food with all of the salmon runs and things like that.
Yeah.
When you stay in one place for a long time, it's more likely you're going to get parasites.
Right.
So cedar branches have, again, terpenes in them that will repel fleas. So when you're on the move all the time, that's one thing. But if you're going to build the log houses, what do they call them? Long houses, something like that.
Yeah.
They have cedar boughs under all of their beds.
Right.
To keep the fleas out. So there's been a few occasions where somebody's called me because their dog has fleas and what can they use, and I might say, are you anybody you know going to Revelstoke this weekend?
Right. You
know, because that's about the closest place you're going to get cedars. And well, as a matter of fact, yeah, we're going to a wedding. Are you going in a truck by chance? And they go, yeah. We're going to, how would you know that? I said, well, I'm just guessing here. But stop anywhere and cut a couple of big cedar branches. And when you get home, now you don't want to boil the crap out of it because then you're giving the good medicine away. You want to simmer them. So use pots with good fitting lids and simmer them on low heat, and then just soak your dog with that.
Right.
And we get rid of all the fleas, you know, and it works beautifully. I've never had it fail.
Yeah. Nice.
So yeah, different things grow in different places for different reasons, and it becomes part of the culture.
Yeah, I think northern bedstraw was another one that was used, not necessarily for fleas, but
pillows.
Pillows, hence the name, bedstraw, right? Yeah.
You can start like here, as well as in the boreal. I would make a bed from, well, in some places, you're just going to put your tent up on sphagnum moss because it's a foot deep, and
right.
You don't need a thermarest or anything. Right? It's like sleeping on a cloud.
For
but
sure.
If you're making a bed out of spruce boughs, when you cut them, spruce boughs always go up into the light a bit at the tip, and depending on how you cut them, there's an angle there. So as you weave the boughs together to get better loft, this is especially when you're winter camping, if you don't have something like a thermarest or a bivouac sack, you got to get your bag well out of against any snow underneath, because you radiate heat. And on an overnight trip, this might not matter much, but if you're staying around for a few days, your bag's going to get less warm day by day, because the moisture that just comes off your whole body makes especially a down bag, you get a certain amount of dampness,
right.
And you lose the insulative value. Something I used to love doing when you are in a nice warm cabin or whatever, and there's all this big snow coming down, fluffy snowflakes, when it's about 40 below, is to just put on some dress socks and go for a quick run around the cabin with nothing else on your feet.
Right.
Even at 40 below.
Yeah.
But the squeak that comes off and it's like walking on a cloud.
Right.
You know, if you stand to talk to somebody, you're screwed because the radiative heat coming off your feet melts the snow, and then you lose all of the insulation, right?
Yeah.
But to go for a quick walk,
Right.
it's just hilarious. Or we have this, it's that evaporative layer that comes off of ourselves that's like right up in there with your aura, I suppose, that you can't do this in a wind, and you can't do it if you're all freaked and move too quickly. But even like at 25 below, you can slide out of a sleeping bag and just stand there naked and look at the stars for several minutes and not be cold at all.
Right.
Because you've got that little insulative layer that's there, and then very slowly get back into bed.
Right.
That's a magic to it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
I don't know what topic we were on that led me to that, but anyway.
Yeah.
Living in the woods.
Let's circle back to flower essences and this kind of idea of dose, because that reminded me, we talked a little bit about how kids can see auras and kind of like energy medicine. Yeah, tell us a little bit more, how flower essences work, and kind of in that, how you make them, prepare them. And for what I've heard is that they work a little bit more kind of on the etheric body. But you would know more than that.
You have to be in a rather meditative state, I think. When we were doing a class out at Terry's farm years ago, he wanted us to go out around the property and try and find something different, something new, if we could just lay around and get any messages. And I think it was one of the wild peas that's actually quite toxic.
Right.
And I was laying with them.
The buck bean or something like that.
And it wasn't buck bean or buffalo berry. Buffalo bean is what you're thinking about.
Okay, yeah, buffalo bean, that's right.
Well, there's another sidebar story. I'll come back to the other in a minute. But I didn't know for the longest time, and I think it was Terry that taught us that they're called buffalo beans because when the flowers are out really early, like now,
yeah,
in the spring, they're one of the first things that are out.
They're gorgeous.
That's when the mother bison are stopping. That's when they're weaning their calves.
Oh, interesting.
And so until the buffalo beans were in flower, you shouldn't be hunting.
Ah.
But
right.
once the buffalo beans came, it was okay to hunt again.
Right.
Anyway, and I can't remember which one of, it was one of the pea families. But as I laid with it, I got a message about violent assault, like rape. I was literally getting a rape message.
Wow.
From these flowers, that it would be good. Who knows why? They don't look like, how do you get a flower to look like a rape? It just doesn't make sense. But you have to be in quite a meditative state, I think, to get to pick up those vibes. And it's part of what we call vibrational healing, right? Where it's nothing about the pharmaceutical contents.
Right.
It's about the vibrations they give off. Back to tricking your body into fixing itself.
Right.
As opposed to a pharmaceutical dose. And they're two completely different studies.
Right.
We need pharmaceutical doses of certain things, and it's all based, once we understand the chemistry of the drug, it's all based on weight, how many you take a day and that sort of thing. Where vibrational healing is a lot more subtle, and it's reminding your body how to heal itself. Right. That's the simplistic way of looking at it.
And it's the idea that water, if you were to analyze it, there are no chemical constituents from that plant in the water. It's somehow picking up on the essence, the vibration.
Yeah, changing the... Well, that's where we learned a lot from... I was so pleased to meet him personally when we had Professor Dr. Emoto here.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
With the crystals of water.
Yeah, yeah. I was
and
there.
When I had an aside with him, having both of his books, there was 2 at the time, and how the way the crystals of the water from flower essences looked completely different
Right.
and how a lot of the crystals looked exactly like the plant. I remember one that was from chamomile, I think, and I can't remember which other one it was, but I had to pull him aside and said, is this, you got these pictures in the book, does that always work? Is this, or are these your trophies?
Right.
And he was very honest when he kind of giggled and said, these are my trophies.
Right.
He said it doesn't, at least at the level he was on at the time, they didn't all work where, you know, rose looked like a rose and that sort of thing. But there was obviously something that he, once again, he was giving, I'll use the word scientific evidence to how flower incessants work, is that they change the frequency of water.
Right.
You know, and it's just water itself is no longer just H2O. It's H2O with a different spin.
Right.
You know, we had one of the conferences I was at in San Francisco there years ago. At the same conference, we had a few men that had never met. A couple of them were some young fellows from a pharmaceutical company, and another one was a grower in France. And they looked at something like a simple monoterpene, like limonene, I think it was, that they both had, the point is, they both had exactly the same results. These are two people who had never met, they never talked to each other, and one of them was a lemon oil producer, and the other one was pharmaceutical people, again studying plants. And who knows why exactly, but it must be a frequency thing, where isomers are things where plants form technically the same molecule, but it's kind of like you could have two baseball gloves that are made by the same manufacturer, and they have, every stitch is the same and the same ounce of leather, and they're identical to each other, but one is for a left-handed catcher.
Right.
And there's no way the left-handed catcher could, without breaking his finger, wear a right-handed glove, right? It just doesn't work. So there was two different isomers of the limonene, and one was powerfully anti-tumoral, and the other one didn't have any such power at all.
Right.
And the only difference was the trees had been grown organically. And so all the people were, yay, organics, you know, look at that, go, you know. But the next day we had the thing I was talking about last trip, where the peppermint growers were there and said that the peppermint we grew organically is actually toxic, you know. So, bad for, anyway. So it's about that little spin somehow that a lot of it we still don't understand. We just, like I said about arnica, I don't have to know how it works to still use it.
Yeah.
Because it does work. Why argue the point? It works, you know. So we call that empirical wisdom, when it's just something that we learned over time, right? And maybe eventually over time we can scientifically left brain validate it.
Right.
Or not. I don't care. If it works, I'm going to use it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, exactly.
So I like, especially at my age, I like nothing better than learning a new trick. Like if somebody shows me a better way to tie my shoes, I might be high on that for a week.
Yeah.
You know? It's just, I don't think anybody will ever fully understand everything. It's just not possible.
No.
And with the extra time I've had with my hospital and now care home stay, I'm watching more documentaries than I ever used to have time for. And some of the things I was told even when I was very young in school about, like we've slowly learned more about quantum physics. And I remember it was hard to understand at first, but that how, like the chair that I'm sitting here, this wood appears solid, but the molecular structure of it is actually mostly air.
Right.
And we've got molecules holding hands in a particular arrangement that appear and seem solid. There's things on the table, the camera's on the table, but there's actually mostly air there. And in such a way that another whole world, another whole dimension, another whole life forms even, can be just slipping right through you and I talking to each other here. There's things going right through us.
Right.
Or we we hear about these, what are they called, the things that are coming from space, little molecules that are literally currently, while we're sitting here, going through right through your brain and the whole foundation of your house.
Right.
I'm forgetting what they're called. No, it's been too long since I thought about them. But there's stuff coming from space that's going right through the whole planet.
Yeah.
You know, bombarded with, what are they called? I don't remember. Anyway, so much stuff we don't understand.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, and there's always two ways to look at it. You know, like I always think about fermentation. The idea of like fermentation used to be viewed with such a kind of a magic, a mystery, you know, like coming back to beer or anything like that. You know, if a new vessel was being incorporated into somebody's fermentation, it was new, it was made, they would say, oh, it would have to learn how to boil, right? So they'd put it with the other vessels. And of course, it's just kind of a transference of bacteria just to kind of get it going,
sure.
right? And so now, you know, scientifically, oh, well, that's the lactobacillus, and, you know, it's eating the sugars, and da-da-da-da-da-da. And, you know, like on one level, like, you know, knowing that kind of takes the magic out of it. But at the same time, it's like, damn, like, the magic is still there, right? Like, it's just a matter of perception and perspective and slowing down and going into, like, the, you know, even if it might not be a mystery, it's still magical, actually. We've got a name for what these organisms are. We kind of know what's going on, but wow, like, still absolutely magical.
I was visiting an old auntie of mine in a care home not long before she died, and we got talking about growing up on the farm when they were kids and very poor, and how at times all there was for supper was boiled milk with rice in it, but she was lactose intolerant.
Right.
And her whole life was miserable, and there was finally some doctor she met that told her she was lactose intolerant, and I said, most adults are lactose intolerant, they just haven't figured it out yet. But
Right.
but she, the only thing that saved her whole life basically was pickle juice.
Right.
And she would never, when you finish a jar of dill pickles, never throw that juice out.
Right.
Keep it in the fridge because it's powerful medicine, you know. And she didn't know all that you know now about how different fermentation affects our whole intestinal flora.
Yeah.
And that's a whole new field of work.
Yeah.
Nobody used to understand it, but now we're half knowing, most people still don't, how powerful a lot of those little microbes are.
Yeah, yeah.
You know? So I guess that's a subject of another interview, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Is this the one that you told me about years ago that would keep, was it the pickle juice or the kraut juice, like in her fridge for sign of a cold? She would kind of
Yeah.
take a little sip, a shot of it.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
I
often reference that.
and it just tastes good.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. Yeah, totally. So, you know, can use it, you know, if you feel like something's coming on, like a little gargle or whatever. Microbially, and you got all the salt in there, but then also, you know, your immune system is within your gut, and keeping the microbes up that way, increasing digestion, so many benefits
Yeah.
to it.
We had, I just flashed on the other thing I told you about last night, about the other foot story.
Oh, that's right. Yeah.
Have we got time for that?
Yeah, for sure.
So we had, usually when I'm out camping, if I'm truck camping or something and using a chainsaw, or if I'm off-road and just using a bow saw or a foldable saw or whatever, same thing. If I'm going to stay somewhere for a little while, the first thing I like to do is get the wood supply. Mm-hmm. Chainsaws are noisy, and maybe there's a big dead tree nearby and we can cut it down and burn the branches first and keep the big rounds to sit on for stools, or bring some home for firewood in the city, whatever. And you get all that out of the way at once. But my wife at the time and I were camping in a spot I'd camped before along a big rapid on the Churchill River. And we were a lake crossing and one portage into another lake where we were going to be staying and fishing and whatnot. And because I guess you know you're in a fishing family when you get a boat motor for a wedding present. And I appreciated that my brother had bought me a side mount. he'd built me this beautiful cedar strip canoe. And you can put these little clamp-on side mounts so that you can put a 2-horse motor on the side.
Great.
And sometimes we would use that sort of equipment when we were doing a lot of fishing, just on big lakes and stuff to get around, and in the ocean too.
Right.
People thought I was crazy going canoeing in the ocean.
Yeah.
But before I had a motor as well, and I had to be really careful with the tides and things, but
Yeah.
I had people that thought I was crazy. But I went, look, I grew up in the boreal forest, and there's places where winds come up faster and make the lakes rougher than I've ever seen. Yes, I've seen 25-foot waves here, but those don't come up in 15 minutes.
Right.
So if you're paying attention, camped on an island somewhere off the west coast of Vancouver Island, and the next place is solid land is Japan, you know, that's okay if you're paying attention and watching the weather. So I fished a lot in the sea with my canoe. But anyway, how did I get off on that tangent? Oh, yes. So we were getting camp all set up, and I'd gone up island a ways to find some more dead trees and cut down this dead tree. And I hadn't trimmed all the branches off very well. And I had something I used to do with logs at times. If they were too heavy for me to carry or get up on my shoulder, I would pick up one end of a log and then sort of duck and crawl under it, and let gravity put it back on my shoulder. So now I've got it on my shoulder. And I had this big heavy log on one side and a much smaller one on the other side, and thought I could carry the chainsaw at the same time to get back to camp. So I'm going barefoot up this massage trail. And when I was just about back to the tents, I threw the chainsaw into a big bushy cedar or juniper bush so that I didn't hurt anything, and was kind of flipping the light log off. And I lost my balance in this big heavy log that had things this long sticking out of it. Mm-hmm. One of them went right through my foot. I was wearing sandals, and it went right through just the space, or slid off, went right through my foot and about 10 inches into the forest floor. So I was pinned there. Whoa. It was like Christ on the cross kind of thing. I was pinned to the island, and I thought, well, this isn't good. I couldn't lift it in the first place. Right. But I guess, and I thought, like, what am I going to have to pull through from squirrel poop to, you know, rotting mushroom mycelium and just everything through this hole in my foot? But the adrenaline must have cut in enough that I had to pull the tree back through my foot. And I thought, okay, this is a pretty serious wound, and I'm really concerned that there's going to be a bunch of bark and stuff in there, but I don't want to abort our holiday because we already had the rest of this camp set up. Yeah. So I looked at my little first aid kit and thought, what can I possibly use here so I don't get my whole foot infected? And knowing that we'd be going through mucky places at times with the canoe portaging and stuff to get in different places to fish. And I thought, oh, I have this blend I made called Dental Pain. Mm-hmm. And I thought, okay, it's going to help the pain a lot, and it's going to be super antibiotic. So I'm just going to put Dental Pain on the hole and wrap it up with a whole bunch of duct tape. Wow. So that I don't bleed to death. And it's waterproof, so that'll keep the mud out of the bandage. And we stayed there for a couple of days. Wow. Finished our holiday. Yeah. Went back, and my foot was quite swollen, and I thought, well, I should go in Lac La Ronge, there's a decent little hospital. And I thought I should really get this x-rayed because there could be a whole bunch of crap in there, and they might have to go in and pick it out or whatever. And so we got to the hospital and told them what happened, and the guy said, oh yeah, okay, so wow, I'm just really impressed with how clean this wound is. I don't know, what do you guys do again? Yeah. And what do you guys do? How many times have I heard that? You know, right. What do you do again? Yeah. So the doctor agreed they'd take a couple of shots of it, and he said, now, I don't care what you guys think you're capable of or whatever, but if there's broken bones in there, technically it's an open fracture, and you have to take some antibiotics. No problem, doc, I get it, that's fine, we will. So they took a couple of shots, and he came back and said, again, I still can't believe how clean your wound is, but there's no sign of infection, there's nothing in there, you've handled this really, really well, and And one of the nurses said, you know, I've seen a few cases where you might just be allergic to the adhesive. The swelling that's there might just be from all the duct tape.
Right.
So they bandaged it up better, and she slipped me a couple of bandages for the next morning or whatever, and we came out of that okay. But it was, you know, I had to just look at what I had available.
Yeah.
And in that case, it was something I made for a rotten tooth that I actually used on my foot.
Wow.
You know, but that was a creepy one.
Yeah.
You know,
Holy.
a lot of pain. And after that, I would always cut all of the sticks off a log before I carried it.
Right.
You know, which I should have done
Lesson
all
learned.
along. You know, yes.
Yeah. Because what's in that formula? I know clove is one of the main
Yeah,
oils.
major. Maybe cinnamon as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
And clove is, well, cinnamon is still the most broad spectrum antibiotic in the world.
Right.
It's way stronger than penicillin or whatever.
Yeah, and I remember, correct me if I'm wrong, I think I remember you saying it is one of the strongest without killing your own probiotics.
Oh,
Is
right.
that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, amazing.
Yeah, like to take orally.
Yeah.
That's why it's so good for something like food poisoning.
Right.
Or whatever, or you just got a stomach flu, which is usually something outside of you, obviously got into your gut. And I remember once my older brother calling, there was that Chinese remedy that I always like to have when I'm traveling. It's Kurenwan, it's called, because they can't say it. They can't say curing pills, so it's like on Chinese medicines, just W-A-N, it just means tablet.
Right.
And they can't say curing, so they're called Kuren.
Right.
Kurenwan. And depending on who was running the label machine that day, it might be different on the other side of the box, you know, kind of thing.
Right.
But the main ingredient in most of those remedies from India and Asia, the first ingredient on most of those remedies is cinnamon.
Wow.
Because it's so broad spectrum.
Amazing.
And when you look at places like the Ganges, where
Oh, gosh.
people are birthing,
Yeah. Defecating.
defecating, washing laundry,
Dying.
and dying, all in the same water, and then drink it. You know, and somehow their intestinal flora has adopted. But when we go in there, people get really ill, right, with diarrhea and such. And so,
Oh, I have personal experience of the Ganges and getting very sick.
those are they're just so cheap, and they were off market for a while, but I think they're back on the market again.
Okay. Yeah.
Some of the Chinese remedies were lost when all this stuff came in with the NPNs and whatnot for the herbs. And so they came back at twice the price with NPNs on the bottle. Mm-hmm. And that's still one, even though all the work I do with other herbs and things, I'd like to always have in my travel packs.
Yeah.
A couple vials of those little red pills.
Yeah.
And a whole vial is just one dose, and they have it. It's all those little tiny red pills, because if you're puking or have diarrhea and you take a big pill, it might not even dissolve yet. So you take a whole bunch of little pills, and they dissolve very quickly, and it works very well. So those are things that, even with all the stuff I make myself, I'm not too proud to be buying Asian things that have been used for thousands of years, you know, and by millions of people. Why not?
Yeah.
So
yeah, interesting, that connection of India and chai, right? Like it's ginger, it's clove, it's black pepper, it's cinnamon.
It'll kill just about anything.
Yeah, yeah. Now, how would you take cinnamon in the case of, say, food poisoning? One of my friends, colleagues, she's really big into like gut health specialist, having been through SIBO, and she was saying that, you know, at least I think it was 60% of IBS can be traced back to initial bout of food poisoning.
Yep.
And just that, like this kind of carry-on effect. Okay, let's say I get food poisoning, you know, cinnamon. Do I reach for cinnamon essential oil? Do I do the cinnamon challenge and like douse tablespoons of it? Or
well, if you don't have any oil to work with, nothing wrong with. I'd prefer cinnamon sticks to powdered cinnamon, just because it's you can get it out. But I would use a thermos.
Okay.
A lot of people, even with ginger, they think it's better when they boil it for an hour. No, it's weaker after you boil it for an hour. You know, it should just be simmered or a tight-fitting pot. But if you've got a thermos around, put a couple of cinnamon sticks in there
Right.
with boiled water and just let it soak for even after a couple hours and start having shots of it. And that'll work overnight for most food poisoning.
Right.
But if I had oil with me, you got to watch out with cinnamon, like clove. It's really hot on tender tissue. Like the inside of your mouth is designed to handle all sorts of things that are harsh, but your lips aren't.
Right.
So when you're taking things like clove or cinnamon orally, you want to be really careful about not getting any on your lips,
Right.
unless it's really, really, really diluted. So
Yeah, I can only imagine you putting that on your open wound. That must have stung a little bit, but you were probably, again, in shock. And
oh
the
no,
adrenaline was-
no, it was in so much pain that you wouldn't have felt a problem with it at all.
Right.
And I was definitely using it full strength. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Neat, as they say.
yes.
Wow.
Yeah, neat means full strength. Like if you're ordering a shot of scotch in a bar, you get it scotch on the rocks, or scotch neat means to just, or
Right.
some nice tequila that you're just going to sip.
Yeah.
Neat means pure.
Yeah, yeah.
Like a neat house, I suppose, is cleaner. So it's pure, something, I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, just being more in tune and having the time to focus. And it was on that trip that I realized how long it had taken to get all of the things that clog us up, like phone numbers and
Right.
what number of pizza you like at that place and what sushi you like at the other place.
Yeah.
And it's not harmful knowledge. It just clogs this up. It's not toxic information.
Yeah.
It just clogs your brain.
What's really important?
So when you get in a place of simplicity, all of that disappears, and you get to a little more in tune with what's around you, and you can pick up some of those subtle vibrations and whatnot. And that certainly helped with things like, at times it's a hunter's sense that you stop because you realize somebody's watching you,
Right.
and you turn and see a rabbit or a grouse staring at you, and they're just staring back, hoping, I hope my camouflage works today,
Yeah.
you know. But I've seen even plants do it when you're walking along, and again, when you're a little more in tune, you must know dewberries. They're the little wild raspberry that they only get about this tall.
Right.
And they have more larger cells than a raspberry would.
Yeah,
So
and
it's a smaller berry, but it's got bigger cells. with
Yeah.
the-
And it's typically singular, right?
yeah.
Yeah.
And where I've sort of sensed something and turned to see a dewberry, oh no, I'm busted. A dewberry drop its leaf over the berry to hide, and simultaneously it's whispered to 35 cousins, and you can just see all these dewberries dropping their
Right.
leaves because they picked up on the vibe.
Yeah.
No, I'm eating you all. You know? Yeah, you get more in tune, and then when you don't have to be noisy to be with a group of people hiking. You know, I remember one morning when there's one of the pea family that I really like. It's often called bear root or sweet vetch.
Right.
And if you get the roots early in the spring, when you can just recognize the leaves coming up, they're reasonably large and sweet and crunchy. They're like little parsnips. And bears really like them a lot. That's why they're called bear root. I think Hedisarum is the Latin name.
Right.
And I really like them, and bears really like them. And a buddy of mine and I, one of my realtor buddies, we were out camping, and we were heading up there's a place on the North Coast River where you can't drive any further because it's the national park boundary. So you can camp right there if you want, but you can't go across that line, right?
Yeah.
So we hike into the park, and we were hiking along and chatting a little, and there was, I just realized all of a sudden that a big bunch of the trail, an area about as big as your living room here, looked like it had just been rototilled. And I saw a couple of not even wilted yet vetch leaves.
Right.
And I'm scanning real quick. What I want to see is a pickup truck with a magnetic sign on the door that says Jim's rototilling, but I know I'm not going to see that. You know, I'm just trying to scan all of the possibilities, because what I'm really looking at means there's a bear really close to us right now that was just having breakfast but heard our voices and went just off the trail. And I grabbed my buddy's arm and just sprinted him about as far as the trucks across the road there. And he was like, what are you doing? And I just grabbed him and threw him over there. And he was about ready to hit me, I think. And I stopped, and we looked back, and we just saw this back rise out of the willows.
Wow.
It had been there having breakfast.
Yeah.
So knowing more about the plants,
Right.
If we weren't talking, we might have gotten trashed that day, or
Yeah.
you know, we were walking into her breakfast type thing, you know. And so the more you know about plants and animals together, they can be very helpful. The animals can help you find plants.
Yeah.
And don't think that just because you see that mice or squirrels have been eating a mushroom means they're safe to eat.
Right.
Because there's a lot of stuff that their digestive systems can handle, but yours can't.
Yeah.
I would never use that as a... in some cases it's true, but in a lot of other cases it's just not. It's not a reliable
Yeah. Yeah.
indicator. So we have thousands of species of mushrooms that grow in Canada. And after reasonably, like as an amateur mycologist studying mushrooms, taking a lot of photographs, there's only a couple hundred that I know without records, with my references with me, or to do spore prints and stuff. You know, we find stuff growing in a city park, and there's a lot of them. I'm going to do a spore print first,
Right.
and go back to one of my reference books and kind of go, sorry guys, we got to leave these alone.
Right.
But just a few hundred yards away, there's enough portobellas to fill a Safeway bag.
Yeah.
And I'm going to take those for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. That's right.
And when you pick a mushroom, you don't have to feel any guilt, because it's no different than picking an apple off the tree.
Mm-hmm, exactly.
The tree, the mycelium, is in the ground or the log or whatever.
Yeah.
And if you find something like Pleurotus austriatus, one of my favorite, that's oyster mushrooms. Mm-hmm. If you find it on a log, you want to write it in your diary or journal or your daykeeper on the way home, or after you get home, just as to where that tree was.
Yeah.
And what the date was, because odds are you can come back next year on the same date and get some more mushrooms from that same log.
Yeah.
For maybe 5 years, until the log finally rots so much it's just turned to dust, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, there's several wonderful mushrooms like portobellas I've found. And back to plant intelligence, portobellas are usually, like, even if you buy them in the store or if you're getting them in the forest, they're maybe this high, right? But I found them growing on city boulevards,
Right.
where they have almost no stipe, because they've learned to duck the lawnmowers. So you got portobellas this big around with a stem this tall, because they duck the lawnmowers, you know?
Yeah.
So it's amazing what plants come up with to still grow.
For sure.
And if you can, again, just try and stay in tune with them.
Yeah. And I remember you sharing a story about, I don't know if it was a neighbor or somebody had found some mushrooms, and you were advising them not to pick them, or to pick them and bring them to you to safely, dispose of.
Oh, maybe because I wanted them for myself?
Yeah,
Is that
exactly.
what you're hinting
like,
at?
oh, yeah, these are very dangerous.
Oh, that would have been with lion's mane.
Oh, was it lion's mane?
On canoe trips, we'd be on portage trails, and
Right.
because some of them are at about eye level on the spruce trees,
Yeah.
and the clumps get about this big,
Right.
and cooked with some garlic and butter.
Yeah.
They're just, the texture is like lobster, like they're just so good with garlic butter.
Yeah.
And people would stop and say, "Oh, are those?" No. I should have gloves on to be. No, keep your children away from these. Yeah, because I wanted everyone I could find on the portage trail.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, yeah, and that idea about having special secret mushroom spots. You got to write those in your will. Pass them along, kind of a deal. People.
It's sort of like sharing a fishing spot with a good friend who shares it with a good friend who shares it with a good friend who shares it with a good friend.
Yeah.
And then it's just all fished out.
Yeah.
So I quit doing that a long time ago.
Yeah.
With both fishing and mushrooms. Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
No, don't go over there. Yeah, there's nothing there at all.
Yeah.
Find any wolf on that trail? No, that trail never has. No, there's none there.
Yeah, and the cool thing about mushrooms, which you mentioned, is, I mean, there's thousands of species. Like, you'll never know them all, but you don't need to, right? There's a handful of some really good choice edibles. You get those really clear, and you're good.
Yeah, quite often people say, "Oh, my grandma knew her mushrooms." No, she didn't. She knew 4 species.
Yeah.
You know, and
yeah,
nobody knows them all.
And to your point, I always make reference to this. You know, in Europe, where there's just a much larger culture around mushrooms and harvesting, and people going out and foraging. They haven't decimated those areas, because, like you say, it's like picking the apples off the tree. And like we were talking about asparagus, I think it was last week. That encourages more shoots to pop up.
Yeah, when I got home that day, I kind of wondered why I just didn't pick it lower down. I just took the top bit, thinking I was being generous. I should eat the whole darn thing.
Yeah.
Because that was tasty.
Right. And of course, as you've also mentioned, these are kind of generalities and rules. There are some types of mushrooms, where they can be over-harvested, where you are taking, like chaga, for instance. It's not just the fruiting body in that regard. It is the organism. So that can be over-harvested. So there's always just being aware.
They have these special blades, the Russians, where they've been studying chaga for at least 50 years for cancer.
Right.
And they've developed these special blades, the chaga hunters, they're like these big, well, hatchet's the wrong word to use, but they're quite large blades, where when they find some chaga in an area, they whack the trees, they damage the other trees, just so chaga will come through them next year.
Right.
They're sort of farming them, really.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, or you cut a section just at the right time of year. Yeah, there's different ways to do it. Those mushrooms take a long time to grow, as well as some of the other perennials like the red belts and the artist conch. And one technique I learned was you can literally just cut off that year's fresh growth, right? That new kind of white ring that's growing on a applanatum or a red belt, that type of thing. So you're basically leaving the majority of it there and just a little strip off for medicine.
Yeah, and the most frustrating thing is when you find just a large area of fruiting bodies of something you really enjoy eating, and the flies got them first.
Oh,
they're just all wormy.
Yeah.
I'm trying to remember the name of one where they...
Well, the aspen boletes are notorious for that. And
it's one of the boletus that they grow to the size of pumpernickel bread loaves.
Right, yeah.
And they have... they're an exception to the rule of if you cut a boletus and it bleeds red or stains dark blue, you should, unless you got your books with you, you should leave them alone. It's kind of a field guide. But there's, I think they're called lexinums.
Yeah.
There's one genus that they do turn blue, but they're the only one that has, what are they called? Where they have little, like Farrah Fawcett haircuts on the stem, the stipe.
Right.
There's little black strips, and they're the only one that does stain, but because it's got those little doodads, it's okay.
Right.
And those are the ones that get quite big.
Oh, yeah.
If the flies haven't gotten to them first, right?
Yeah, that's actually Alberta's provincial mushroom, the lexinum, the aspen.
Lexinum, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Really?
Aspen bolete. Yeah, they get huge. The big, orange, red caps, and like the scaber stalk.
That's it, scabers.
Yeah. And again, that's one of those things of like knowing your environment, knowing your area, knowing that symbiotic relationship. Like, okay, aspen, middle of summer. Let's go in. Let's check it out. Let's see what we got.
Yep.
Yeah. All right. Well, it's been fun. Another good morning. Thanks everybody for tuning in.
Thanks again. I feel like this is a regular TV show now.
Right, there we are. Cool. All right.
Thanks again, my friend.
Yeah, right on. Absolutely. Okay. Post your comments, any questions, anything down below.
Has anybody done that yet?
Lots of comments. There was one question. It didn't come via comment. They sent it as a direct message. I'll have to look that up because I've forgotten it now, what it was. I didn't, yeah, it was like, oh yeah, great, I'll ask him next time. And then, okay, we'll carry that forward to the next episode.
Okay.
Including anything else that you guys put out there. So yeah, mostly it's just been people's comments of gratitude, you know.
Well, between the two of us, it would be a good game. We could just, if we make this a regular thing, we'll just call it Stump the Herbalists.
Right.
Nobody knows it all.
Yeah, it's true. Yeah.
But we try.
Yeah, it's a good journey. So, okay. Bye for now.
Thanks again.